Good morning, everyone. It's still good to see some of you staying back on Sunday morning. So, okay. Yeah, the last time I used this was in a barber's or a salon as a child when they put that for my haircut, so it's been a while. So the topic that I'm speaking on is using clinical trials to choose DPP-4 therapy. Now, we hear a lot of conversations on DPP-4s. We've been using incretins for over a decade and a half. But over the next 20 minutes, I'm hoping to throw some more light on why gliptins are continuing to be so relevant and what are the differences amongst gliptins and some perfect case scenarios where we could consider these drugs. So rationalizing the use of gliptins, the right kind of patients, selection criteria among gliptins, what are the key differences, and two cases which is about a middle-aged man with CKD and a newly diagnosed young lady with diabetes. So gliptins, of course, are a popular class in India. Many patients get gliptin plus metformin combinations as the first anti-diabetic agents. Gliptins today form a part of regimen in very high number of patients in India, especially with the low-cost gliptins or some of the gliptins going generic. This seems to be a very common practice. You, of course, have a wide choice of agents. Dr. Rita ended her talk with those multiple agents targeting different aspects in management of diabetes. And we know that for our patients as well, we have all these options available. With gliptins, the experience, of course, has been more than 12 years in India. Now, reasonable to consider gliptins more often than not. One, there are plenty of choices, each with unique features. Efficacy for gliptins is similar to all other oral anti-diabetic drugs. Sometimes there's conversation about whether are they really that efficacious, are the other agents more effective, and I'll throw some more light on that as we proceed. Tolerability profile, I think it's easy for busy patients, easy for busy physicians, safe for senior citizens, improved compliance, yes. So really, gliptins today are the no-nonsense medication, the known headache medication, where you don't have to worry much about in terms of the predictability of outcome or the lack of adverse events. Body of evidence is with a huge variety of patients. The use has been tremendous over the last decade and a half. And when it comes to some tricky situations using in patients with liver disease, chronic kidney disease, cardiovascular disease, there's enough evidence for their efficacy and safety. So some of the unique things about the gliptins, well, when you look at all these class of drugs, be it metformin, TZDs, SUs, DPP-4s, or SGLT2 inhibitors, and then let's look at some of the action profiles in terms of insulin production, actually. It's DPP-4s which have evidence in increasing that. Insulin secretion, yes, like SUs, DPP-4s will also increase the insulin secretion. Hepatic glucose output, metformin is the primary drug. You have some evidence for gliptins have an indirect effect there as well. Insulin resistance at the periphery, again, metformin is a premier drug there along with TZDs. Some mild effect of the DPP-4s as well. And so on, you see that most of the target areas seem to be covered by gliptins, giving us that multifaceted approach that we require to treat our patients with type 2 diabetes. What are some of the other unique things about gliptins? Well, effective anti-diabetic medication with no increased hazards, especially in patients with chronic kidney disease. So when we look at efficacy, proven efficacy of gliptins across all stages of renal failure, safety, there are no safety concerns for gliptins in CKD except dose adjustment were required, and usage restriction, no usage restriction. We know today that gliptins can be used in all stages, including in patients with end-stage renal disease and requiring hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis. So only gliptins can be used in all stages of CKD without any increased risk in adverse events. What are some of the still more unique things about gliptins? So no meaningful drug interactions and minimal metabolism and or excretion through the hepatobiliary route. And that's very often a concern. In fact, unfortunately, that's not even a concern in a lot of physicians' mind because we are not aware about the kind of interactions our routine anti-diabetic drugs can have with other more commonly used medications. And here is just a list of some of these drugs which we may be using, and you'll be surprised to see that when we use sulfonylureas or we use metformin, there's actually a lot of drug-drug interaction. Sometimes we may not be aware of the same. So looking for a safer option really is the need of the hour. And when it comes to DPP-4s, especially sitagliptin there, not appreciably metabolized. There is renal excretion, 80% of it being excreted unchanged. No clinically relevant drug interaction requiring any dosage adjustment of the gliptin or the other drug. And that's another strength and huge advantage for the gliptins, especially sitagliptin here. So only metformin and sitagliptin minimally metabolized or excreted through the hepatobiliary system. Sitagliptin, Vilda, EMPA, DAPA, there is evidence for all of these, no clinically relevant drug-drug interactions. Moving on, some more unique things about the gliptins, no meaningful change of efficacy and or tolerability with age. So I think that's important today when you're treating a wide spectrum of patients, especially the growing elderly population. We have seen with some of the other drugs that the efficacy does come down. So a drug which continues to be efficacious is most welcome, and especially in gliptins, we see that no age-related change in efficacy or tolerability issues. Sitagliptin in the elderly, there's evidence that you look at patients here, in patients who less than 75 or more than 75 years of age, clear efficacy evidence of 0.7% reduction in HbA1c, so age is not a barrier. You look at canagliflozin or SGLT2 inhibitors in general in the elderly population, the studies have shown with advancing age, reduction in GFR, the efficacy in terms of reduction of HbA1c does go down in the SGLT2 class. Moving on, some more unique considerations, and that's especially in the Indian patients. We would have said Asian patients, but now there's evidence that Indian patients do much better even than Asian patients, which do far better than the Caucasian patients in terms of their response to the DPP-4 inhibitors. So DPP-4 enzymatic activity and incretin response to meals significantly more in Indians and Asians. Data suggests that efficacy of gliptins is significantly more, again, in Asians. Indian studies have substantiated this and indicated that gliptins may work better in Asian Indians as compared to the rest of the population. And this unique race-dependent impact on efficacy is not established, or there's not much evidence with other group of drugs showing this preferential benefits in the Indian Asian population. So let's look at the efficacy data. So you compare the efficacy with other OAD classes. You compare it with metformin, and we see sitagliptin 100 milligram per day is found to be as efficacious as metformin 1000 milligram per day, and even moving up to 2000 milligram per day. So with a baseline HbA1c of 9.7, reduction in A1c is 2.2%. You look at sulfonylureas, both after metformin, you compare with sulfonylureas and DPP-4s. Again, sitagliptin 100 milligram per day, showing 0.54 reduction in HbA1c on top of metformin as compared to 0.51 in the glipizide group. Pioglitazone, again, sitagliptin 50 milligram per day, scoring very well in terms of 0.86% reduction. And you look at voglibose or alpha-glucosidase inhibitors, again, sitagliptin found to be far more efficacious. So sometimes that belief that are DPP-4 inhibitors that efficacious is a myth, because most of the data that came in initially in terms of the phase 3 studies was with a baseline HbA1c of 7.8 and 8%, and most of the gliptins showed a 0.6 to 0.8% reduction in A1c. And that's the data actually which is seen for most of the drug classes. So if you see if the higher the HbA1c, you'll actually figure out the difference in terms of efficacy, clearly substantiating the belief now that DPP-4 inhibitors are extremely efficacious, especially in the Indian Asian population. So non-inferior to the usual dose of SGLT2s, now we go ahead and compare it with SGLT2 inhibitors, because very often we hear this conversation that SGLT2 inhibitors may be far more efficacious. Is there evidence to substantiate that? So in the HbA1c reduction in the graph on the left side, you see when you compare sitagliptin 100 milligram to 100 milligram of canagliflozin, you get similar reduction. A slightly better reduction in A1c with canagliflozin 300 milligram. Again, for empagliflozin, you see a slightly better 0.78 reduction as compared to 0.66 with 10 milligram of empagliflozin and 100 milligram of sitagliptin, saying SGLT2 inhibitors in the higher dose may have a little advantage, but in the dose that we land up using predominantly, which is Cana 100 or empagliflozin 10 milligram, or what we see half tablet of 25 milligram used so commonly, there is no real difference in efficacy with sitagliptin 100. So DPP-4 inhibitors, numerically more effective than the usual dosage of SGLT2 inhibitors. What does the usual reduction in SGLT2 inhibitors? And we see that again with SGLT2 inhibitors, as the baseline increases, you will see reduction in HbA1c to the tune of 1.2, 1.3%, but a baseline of 8, 8.5, you're not seeing results beyond 0.7, 0.8% reduction in A1c, and which is exactly the same that you get with DPP-4 inhibitors. What about safety of gliptins versus other oral drugs? So again, there are huge concerns on safety for every group of drug that we use. In terms of contraindication, boxed warnings in the US for DPP-4 inhibitors, we don't see that. Are there precautions? Yes, there are some amount of warnings and precautions in the labels. For DPP-4 inhibitors, if we see, there is increased risk of hypoglycemia, especially when used with sulfonylurea or insulin. We have to be cautious on that. There are some post-market reports of acute pancreatitis, acute renal failure, serious allergic and hypersensitivity reactions, just like any other drug, but nothing which is put in a black box warning for this group of drug. For saxagliptin, of course, there was risk of heart failure, recommended monitoring or avoiding in that group of patients. Vildagliptin not to be used in patients with hepatic impairment, and for teneligliptin, concerns due to QT prolongation, especially with 40 milligram and higher doses. But if you see the safety issues listed with all other drugs that you may be aware of, whether it's SGLT2 inhibitors or even with sulfonylureas today, they're far higher concern than DPP-4 inhibitors as a group itself. So gliptins, again, minimal stress in the right patient selection. Gliptins work in almost all patients where it is indicated without any change in efficacy, be it CKD, be it elderly. Efficacy demonstrated to be similar to all other OAD classes. So any kind of myth that we may have in mind in terms of a group working more efficaciously than gliptins is ill-founded. Use case in Indian patients, great evidence for better efficacy, and no adverse events more frequently observed than any other OADs, in fact, far lesser if you see the comparison. So are all the DPP-4 inhibitors then the same? Is it good enough for me to use any of these? So let me point out some subtle differences between them. There are differences in structure and chemical property. There are differences in mechanism by which they inhibit the DPP-4 enzyme. There are differences in DPP-4 inhibition in terms of how long they continue to inhibit. Is it for 24 hours? What is the residual DPP-4 activity for each of these molecules? Differences in the DPP-4 selectivity, and that is what may lead to different side effects in different gliptins. Differences in their PK/PD, in their metabolism, excretion, etc. Different use in different comorbidities, restrictions of use as per labels, or any difference in evidence base. So in terms of key determinants, it actually is going to be important that how much of DPP-4 remains inhibited at the end of 24 hours. And if you see amongst the gliptins, the residual DPP-4 activity is the least for sitagliptin, and that's because of maximum DPP-4 inhibition at the end of 24 hours. So you see 91.7% inhibition of the DPP-4 activity with a single dose of 100 milligram of sitagliptin. If you compare that with vildagliptin, we see that this can be achieved, but only by 2 doses. So if you're going to be using the full dose of vildagliptin 50 milligram twice a day, you will end up achieving more than 90% DPP-4 inhibition, but very often the suboptimal dosages used will not suffice. Now, why is this important? Because the DPP-4, if not optimally inhibited, will continue to deactivate the GLP and GIP, and that's the entire crux and mechanism of this group. So if you see here physiology, incretin's area under the curve increase after every meal. We can see the 2 graphs here in terms of what can be seen. Right, sorry. So we can see that with the glucose curve, the incretins also increase. However, in patients with diabetes, the increased DPP-4 activity, there is reduced incretin effect and more hyperglycemia, and that's the difference we see in patients with diabetes. So when we use these drugs, we want to get this activity down, and this is possible only by using DPP-4 inhibitors which cause maximum DPP-4 inhibition. And if not, you use half the dose or use suboptimal doses, this is the kind of DPP-4 activity which remains and doesn't give you the benefit of the incretin effect, and hence you somehow don't get the desired results and you start believing that the efficacy is not as good as the other group of drugs. So comparison of efficacy, sitagliptin in head-on randomized clinical trials, and you see the comparison with vildagliptin, 1.2% as compared to 1, saxagliptin again 0.62 as compared to 0.52. You look in linagliptin, again 23.4 per milligram % reduction in fasting as compared to 5.4. So across the group of different DPP-4 inhibitors, evidence for sitagliptin in terms of better efficacy. No other gliptin demonstrated any superiority to sitagliptin. So today, that's why when we talk about the hallmark of gliptins, it still continues to be sitagliptin because of proven efficacy across the different oral antidiabetic drugs within the segment itself, and safety which is proven beyond doubt as compared to all other gliptins in the class. What about durability? So only sitagliptin actually has this interesting data of durability for 4 years as monotherapy, or for up to 7 years when used in combination with metformin. So we see the data here clearly seen in terms of reduction in HbA1c and the sustainability or durability of the effect, which is lasting till the end of 84 months, especially when used in combination with metformin for sitagliptin. So you need a drug which continues to work and continues to be durable so that the patients continue to respond and improve their compliance. What about selectivity profile of DPP-4 inhibitors? Now that's an important aspect. So more than 104 selectivity of DPP-4 over DPP-8 or DPP-9, that's the desired effect. You see that kind of selectivity for sitagliptin and linagliptin. More than 104 selectivity for DPP-4 over FAP, which is fibroblast activated products. Again, You see that for sitagliptin, vildagliptin, saxagliptin, but not for linagliptin. So in terms of selectivity, extremely high for sitagliptin in compared to all other DPP activity. How is this relevant? So let's look at that. So DPP4-like enzymes, they're clinically relevant roles. So DPP8 has possible some role in the immunity, in lymphocyte activation, spermatogenesis and male infertility. So there may be some dose-dependent reduction in lymphocyte count. So every time there's been concerns with immune reactions or low immunity or decreased wound healing, probably it's to do with the DPP8 inhibition. You look at the DPP9 role again, so possible role again in immunity and in some hemodynamics, especially at the carotid artery endothelium. So evidence emerging that there may be, and there just may be, this is postulated mechanisms, a possible role in increase in the heart failure, which was the concern with some of the gliptins, is probably because of the DPP9 inhibitory effect. And then you look at the fibroblast activating protein, possible role in malignant progression of tumors or wound healing and blood clotting. So hence, again, your selectivity for DPP4 is extremely important. So minimizing the off-target inhibition, well, DPP8, if it's not selective for DPP4 and may inhibit DPP8, you can get some kind of skin reactions, bullous, pemphigoids, etc., or prolongation of QT interval. In terms of DPP9, it's present in cardiomyocytes, so that's the evolving postulation that this could be responsible for the increase in heart failure seen with some of the gliptins. So really, the more selective the drug for DPP4, the lesser the side effects. In terms of chronic liver disease, the diverse profile for this drug, and you can appreciate that when you look at saxagliptin and linagliptin, they are indicated in patients with hepatic impairment. Sitagliptin indicated in mild to moderate hepatic impairment, but not in severe. You look at vildagliptin, not to be used in patients with hepatic impairment. And teneligliptin, again, hepatic dysfunction is included in its clinically significant adverse reaction, so no real clear data of safety there. What about CVD? We are aware of the various cardiovascular outcome trials. SAVOR-TIMI was the study which threw up the problem for saxagliptin in terms of increased hospitalization for heart failure with a hazard ratio of 1.27, so 27% higher increase in heart failure. And you look at the data for rest of the 3 and 4 point MACE, proving non-inferiority to placebo and showing safety for the entire class of gliptins, including sitagliptin in the TCOS study. So choice consideration for choosing a particular gliptin, choose the gliptin with highest chance of success. In younger patients, choose an agent which has good durability data, because today your patients are much younger and you need to treat them for much longer duration of time. Use the one which has lesser risk of adverse events. Also think of any kind of comorbidities with hepatic or renal disease, the safety data that you have for the gliptin, and of course in terms of cardiovascular disease safety. Now let me quickly move on to those two cases that I spoke about in the beginning that we'll discuss. So here we're talking about a middle-aged man with chronic kidney disease, 50-year-old father of two, small-sized retail business owner, moderately active, BMI 28, diagnosed with diabetes 8 years back, was on an SU metformin regime, but typically kept stopping the medications, went off it, tried some herbal or Ayurvedic preparations, and then more recently, routine check done 6 months back showed an A1C of 9.9. More importantly, renal dysfunction setting in, eGFR dropping down to only 18. Was put on insulin, was also put on dialysis. HbA1c after 6 months still 8.5. This patient is on regular dialysis with insulin. eGFR has improved a little to 25. What can we offer this patient more? Well, there's no history of CVD or any major CV risk factors. Liver functions normal. Sonography showed possible fatty liver. So some treatment considerations. One, he's around 50, not very old, would still need a very long-term stable strategy. BMI is 28, so there's still some role of lifestyle modification in this patient. What about metformin? How many of you would want to restart metformin for this patient? Anybody? Right? Patient is on dialysis, eGFR at 25. A little risky proposition, not recommended by most associations to start. There's the different thought, somebody was on metformin, whether you should knock it off, but at 25, starting metformin is probably a big no-no. SGLT2 inhibitors may be effective in reducing blood sugars, but we're not sure. In the eGFR segment below 30, there are still recommendations of safety and minimal efficacy there. So we would still need an effective anti-diabetic medication. Sulfonylureas were tried earlier, may increase the risk of hypoglycemia in this patient on dialysis. Pioglitazone, well, will have tolerability issues and further fluid retention and edema. So again, not the best option on patients with renal failure and on dialysis. So gliptins with data in dialysis may be considered. Are there gliptins which have data in patients on dialysis? And that's why we chose these two cases. They're not your routine cases. So we are talking about a patient on dialysis, already on insulin, but yet not reaching the target. So OAD used by eGFR CKD staging, and you look at the various drugs available, and you start seeing for sitagliptin, this is approved in all stages, just that the dose needs to come down. So as the eGFR starts falling down, you will decrease from 100 to 50 milligram to 25 milligram. So patients in stage 4 and stage 5, 25 milligram of sitagliptin will give us the same efficacy as shown in the previous studies. So a lower dose, either 25 or 50, depending on the stage of CKD, has been found to be as effective as sulfonylureas in CKD patients. You see 0.6% reduction in A1C for sitagliptin as compared to glipizide. You see again, when you move on to moderate to severe renal impairment, again a 0.8% reduction in A1C for 25 milligram of sitagliptin as compared to glipizide. Those on dialysis, again, 0.72% reduction for sitagliptin as compared to 0.88 for glipizide, slightly higher there, but increasing the chance of hypoglycemia. So sitagliptin effective regardless of the renal function. This is 4 years data monotherapy, showing that over this period of time, irrespective of the renal function, they found sitagliptin to be effective. Gliptins in end-stage renal disease patients on hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis, again, strong evidence through multiple papers that there was no significant difference in the decrease in HbA1c level among different gliptins used. In contrast, in patients on peritoneal dialysis, they saw some advantage for sitagliptin as compared to Vilda and linagliptin. But essentially, all gliptins found to be efficacious and safe in patients on end-stage renal disease. Also, some evidence substantiating that sitagliptin, as compared to sulfonylureas, may have some additional benefits in reduction of urine albumin-creatinine ratio. So some other added benefits there. So sitagliptin, renal safety data, we have seen that pooled safety analysis for sitagliptin. You also start looking at the cardiovascular outcome trial renal data from TICOS, and you see whether it's for microalbuminuria worsening or worsening of renal failure, sitagliptin found to be safe just as compared to placebo. So no adverse events in that segment there. So going back to our case 1, is it indicated? Well, it is indicated use of sitagliptin, expected to be effective, yes. Durability data with 25 milligram sitagliptin, no clinically relevant drug interaction or specific tolerability issues. Safety data from large outcome studies have been found. So that's probably the drug of choice there to add to insulin to get the better reduction. Quickly moving on to the second case. Now, this is a newly diagnosed young lady, 38-year-old, have past history of GDM, BMI 26, diagnosed with diabetes on routine checkup, a corporate lawyer, drives daily over 18 kilometers to her office, routinely does yoga, heavy smoker, A1C 7.3. So this lady is typically put on to metformin. She's very clear that she doesn't want to take drugs twice a day, wants to prefer taking once a day, so she's given metformin 1 gram. A1C after 3 months worsens and goes up to 7.7. A glimepiride 1 milligram is added. She very soon complains of hypoglycemic attacks, hunger pangs, headache, and wants to stop the drug immediately. So that is withdrawn, and this patient is then given vildagliptin. Again, she insists on getting it only once a day, so 50 milligram of vildagliptin with 1000 milligram of metformin is given to her. A1C at the end of 3 months is again up at 7.6. So she's the one who's not reaching target, probably that aggressive younger patients that we are seeing so often now. So in the next steps, it is uptitrated to vildagliptin metformin twice a day. She's now told that there's no other way, you have to take it twice a day. A1C again after 3 months is 7.3. Well, she admits that she does miss the evening dose often. She promised she'll take it, but she's just not being compliant. She's, however, stopped smoking. Recommended to use DAPA. So at this stage, we said, okay, let's use dapagliflozin and metformin. You have a combination available once a day. Let's start using that. But she's a corporate lawyer. You as a doctor are going to put everything in front of the table and tell her about the possible side effects, UTI, genital infection, so on and so forth. And she says, I don't want this. With my kind of profile, my job, I can't just afford to have infections, genital infections, UTI, so there's no way I would want to try taking this kind of a drug, and she flatly refuses this. So what is really unique about this case? Well, could be a standard case. Why am I discussing this? But let's remember that this patient is demanding special attention because of her professional profile, her eagerness in participation in her treatment strategy. She wants to discuss and understand. She has certain issues about being non-compliant in the evening, missing out even though she wants to, and so on. So we need to really consider what would be the best option for her. And again, I go back to that previous slide about efficacy of DPP-4s. So sitagliptin 100 milligram once a day is going to be as efficacious as vildagliptin twice a day. So essentially, there's another study which speaks about predictive factors for effectiveness of gliptin and metformin showing more effectivity for certain gliptins. The predictive factors for response are based on patients' HbA1c. So if you look at the HbA1c less than 8.5, higher the HbA1c level, more predictable the response for DPP-4 inhibitors. So that may impact the efficacy. There are some smoking, weight gain while on gliptins will affect the efficacy. Higher insulin resistance brings down the effect of gliptins. Higher level of DPP-4 requires more robust DPP-4 inhibition. And race, again, more effective in the Asian Indian populations. So coming back to the case, in the interest of time and rushing, what was decided to be done? As she was not taking the vildagliptin metformin twice a day, she was offered to take sitagliptin and 1,000 milligram of metformin extended release, which is available as a combination pack, which was once a day, and she agreed for the same to take that. And with that, probably the chances of getting into control, because she's now with single dosage going to get the full DPP-4 inhibition which we require, and this is something which is substantiated by the durability data for the drug. So for this second case, the choice of drug when we are stuck in clinical situations can be a combination of sitagliptin and 1,000 milligram extended release metformin. So with this few words and me being out of time, I thank you all for the patient hearing.
Thank you, Doctor.